was diagnosed as type 1 diabetic right about the time I turned 40.
Oh my God, who the hell cares?
For the past 5 years, I have been using the Dexcom G6, and it has greatly helped me get control of my glucose numbers. Dexcom released the G7 version in the US in February of 2023. At a recent doctor visit, my doctor gave me a free sample. I replaced my G6 sensor on November 9th, 2024, and thought it would be fun to install the G7 at the same time and compare the readings. Let's see what I've learned. I have the Dexcom application installed on an Android phone for my G6. I also carry an iPhone, and I installed the Dexcom application on the iPhone and linked that to the G7. For the uninitiated, the G6 comes as a sensor that is separate from the transmitter. The sensor is what is stuck to your body and lasts for about 10 days. The transmitter plugs into the sensor and throws the readings to your phone via a Bluetooth connection. The transmitter typically lasts around 3 months. For the G7 sample that I had, the sensor and the transmitter were one unit. I am not sure if that is the way it normally is, or if that was a simplification for the purpose of making the usage sample simple. Sample. The sensor for the G6 is bigger, but also provides more adhesive to keep the sensor in place. The G7 is smaller and provides a patch that applies over the smaller G7 sensor that is supposed to help keep it in place. Once that overpatch is applied around the G7 sensor, the size of the adhesive patch sticking the sensor to your skin is about the same for the G7 and the G6. G6 on my lower abdomen and the G7 on the back of my upper arm. I had to remove the G7 after only 4.25 days because I accidentally hit it when I was drying off after a shower and the adhesive did not hold the sensor on. I calibrated both sensors to an old finger prick test strip reading from my old One Touch Mini. My first impressions did not see much daylight between the G7 and G6 experience. Number one, the Dexcom G7 readings were less smooth than the G6. From time to time, I have had G6 sensors that provided slightly erratic readings. So this might not be a failing of the G7 in general, and more a problem with the particular sensor I was using. Number two, the smaller G7 footprint was nice, but clearly did not work in my case. Number three, I liked the fact that the sensor and the transmitter were one unit in the G7. It did not make it significantly better, but it was one step simpler. Number four, the G7 failing after I forgot it was on my arm when I was toweling myself off and wound up slightly dislodging it, but not fully detaching it, was disappointing. I have done similar things while wearing the G6, and it has typically survived. Number five, the Android app is different than the iPhone app, but not significantly, but still more different than I expected. Dexcom allows you to set up more than one profile under the same account, but requires separate IDs and passwords. Annoying, but not significantly so. The G7 has a 30-minute warm-up before you can see the glucose readings on your phone app. The G6 has a 2-hour warm-up. The G6 numbers had a larger standard deviation, larger variance, and larger mean. The G7 had 3 times more instances of failed readings than the G6. The G6 and G7 numbers tracked well with each other, but there were instances when they did not align well at all. The G6 numbers tended to be about 20 units higher than the G7. In conclusion, I have one experience with the G7, and that was for less than 5 days, and almost 5 years worth of experience with the G6. So the G7 is at a disadvantage. If it is standard to package sensors and transmitters, that is a point for the G7. But the failure of it halfway through the cycle and the erratic nature of the readings does not lead one to have confidence in the G7. I assume I will go to the G7 at some point, but for now I am fine with the G6. Data can be found at this GitHub repo if you are interested. Data can be found at this GitHub repo if you are interested. Data can be found at this GitHub repo if you are interested. This is life, if I recall correctly.